WDET is supported by the College of Business Administration at University of Detroit Mercy. UDM's Master of Business Administration is designed to accommodate the career needs of professionals across a variety of work organizations. More information at business.udmercy.edu.
Broadcasting live from Mackinac Island, you're listening to WDET's continued coverage of the 2024 Mackinac Policy Conference. I'm Nick Austin, and this year's conference continues the tradition of seeing Michigan's largest collection of lawmakers, advocates, and policy thinkers in one place. This year, the theme for the conference is Bridging the Future Together, an idea that sounds great on paper, but that doesn't mean everyone has the same thoughts on the best way to implement this vision. That's why this hour we'll speak with some of the policy leaders on the island to get their ideas on what we should be thinking about, what we should be doing to create a stronger future for Michigan. One of the big areas of focus at last year's conference was Governor Gretchen Whitmer's announcement of the Growing Michigan Together Council, a group tasked with helping address our state's struggles with population and economic growth. And what does that mean? What does it look like? Well, recent numbers showed Michigan ranking 49th in population growth out of the 50 states. And if workers are the engine of a thriving economy, numbers like that should have us on high alert. So, 1 year after the announcement, what have we learned and what steps is the state taking to make this goal a reality? To help us answer these questions and more, we're joined by Hilary, Chief Growth and Marketing Officer for the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. Hilary, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Glad to have you here. I think the obligatory question they all tell me is, living in Detroit, let's ask the most important question. How often do people welcome you with "What up, Doe"?
As often as possible. I love it.
Yeah. Well, we're glad to have you here. I mean, the dough we're talking about right now is the money and the cash, right? But what exactly does the Michigan Economic Development Corporation do to help us start out with this conversation?
Yeah, well, I'm so happy to be, part of the MEDC team. The team is so diverse. I think that's one thing that maybe folks across the state don't get the chance to see. And what I mean by that is, we have folks working on business attraction, which, sometimes gets the headlines. But we also have folks working on small business. We have folks working on entrepreneurship and innovation, which is, as you saw in the report, the Growing Michigan Together Council report that came out in December of last year, such a critical part of our strategy to grow Michigan's population. Investing in that entrepreneurial and innovation ecosystem will be critical to Michigan's future growth. And of course, we're Michigan's, sort of marketing and storytelling engine as well at the MEDC. I'm really happy to say that sort of marketing machine is now sitting with me at the growth office. I have growth and marketing now in my purview. So we're doing the work to make sure we have, a policy agenda to help make Michigan a better and better place to call home, to retain and attract talent, but also that we're telling the stories we need to in order to, about our great state, to make sure that we can keep and grow Michigan's population.
Yeah, everybody's on board with that. We'll get into this idea of what the state can do versus private business, that interaction on how that works. But before we do that, looking back now, it's been a year since the announcement. You did mention the report. Did anything really stick out to you? Maybe a surprise that you weren't expecting to find out when you looked through it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this whole process, when we started, right, and it was the task is grow Michigan's population, whatever it takes. Michigan was one of 34% of states that have been seeing population stagnation or declines. So we are not alone in the challenge, but we were the first state in the nation to say, hey, we're going to take it on. So when we started, it could have been any number of variables that rose to the top as being the key areas where we had to intervene. But through work comparative states, our faster growing peers, through lots of survey work, and frankly, lots of public engagement. We ended up doing 80 public engagement events, sitting with over 3,000 Michiganders in only 2.5 months. During that process, we learned an incredible amount. And what rose to the top were that we need to really look at Michigan's median income. Our faster growing peer states had higher and faster growing median incomes. We really need to look at our post-secondary attainment and credentialing in Michigan. And we need to look at our placemaking. Our young folks in particular want amenity-rich, transit-rich places. And having all three of those things work together was going to be critical to growing Michigan's population.
You bring up points that I heard when we were talking with young people as early as last year. They'll talk about things as though you can get this from other states. In fact, some would tell you they feel pressure to leave the state in order to attain something that might help raise their income when they come back. And, you know, I know you spent some time in Brooklyn, for example.
I did. Yeah, I'm boomerang.
Yeah, which we hear a lot of the story. But are there any things that we can do in the short term to help prevent that? You talk about things like educational detainment, but some folks are like, hey, man, we got to stop the bleeding right now. What do you see that we can do in the short term to help with
Absolutely. I'll highlight one recommendation in the report and one other short-term opportunity I think we have. So one recommendation in the report, I mentioned entrepreneurship and innovation. Michigan is already a top 10 state for patents. We've always been a leader in innovation. And we also have arguably the country's preeminent Black Tech community in Black Tech Saturdays. For folks that don't know it, check it out. And so we have this opportunity, if we can keep our entrepreneurs in the state to commercialize their businesses here, to really help grow median incomes for all kinds of folks in an equitable way. So things like the Innovation Fund that you saw in the governor's budget this year is one way to kickstart that, making sure we can invest in our entrepreneurs here and commercialize those businesses here. That could really make a difference. And in some of our research and work, making sure we can keep those businesses here will be critical. The other thing I'll highlight is cities and states across the country are beginning to invest in talent attraction and retention programs. The talent war is competitive. Folks across the country are doing, innovative, different things. And we took the chance over the last 8 months to look at all of those programs to see what works. And in the growth office, what we're getting ready to launch here are opportunities for communities across the state to pilot some of those different programs. Because growth will look different in the UP than it looks in Detroit, than it looks in Grand Rapids. And each of those places can pilot some of those kind of unique opportunities for talent retention and attraction.
That's exactly right. We've spoken with Black Tech Saturdays, for example, Johnny Turnage. Love those ideas, that implementation that's happening there. But that brings us to this focus of Detroit, right? Because I think we see out of state, drivers of state growth happen with your big city. However, in Detroit, a lot of folks feel left behind by this engagement, by getting the dollars, by getting the investment in that area. What do you say the state can do? What recommendations would you have to help drive Detroit? First of all, do you agree with me on that point? And then what do we need to do to help grow Detroit?
Yeah, I agree completely that, our state's growth is inextricably linked to the growth of our big cities, in part because of, frankly, young folks want to live in our big cities. They want to live in our dense, transit-rich, walkable communities. And I would also say that, that doesn't inherently leave anybody behind. We can see in all kinds of states that when their big cities prosper, the whole state prospers, right? That it's not sort of a scarcity mindset, right? It's an abundance mindset. When a city does better, the whole state does better. So when we think about investing in some of these sort of policy solutions that you saw in the blueprint, you'll see that there is intentionality in terms of, investing in place and investing in, these dense, walkable, transit-rich communities, investing in places that maybe historically were left behind in terms of their post-secondary outcomes or their, educational outcomes, and making sure that we can get to a place where we have more equitable outcomes, not just even investment, but equitable sort of outcomes is what we're striving for.
Right. And this gets us to the idea of the role the state can play with private business, because you can even have conversations with private business. It's odd to me. They'll say, oh, there's not enough talent that I need for whatever job I have, versus you have folks who are trying to get these jobs saying, hey, I can't find the place in the private sector to get the job, right? So if we're looking at that, what can the state do in terms of helping create that link, helping make sure that private business has access to these folks and are looking for these equitable solutions? Maybe some folks who need that boost in order to get the training and talent that they need to move forward.
Yeah, so this is a good chance to brag a little. And if I can say one thing to Michiganders, to Detroiters, to everybody, let's brag a little bit more. We all know that if you love a place, you can always make it better. We should engage in continuous improvement. But we should also brag a little bit about the good things we've got so that we can continue growing our place. And this is a chance for us to brag because our talent action team at MEDC is doing some of the work that you just described, and in fact doing it in really innovative ways. They just won Fast Company's 100 Most Innovative Companies recognition for this talent action team work. They received that recognition for some of their work with the Michigander Scholars Program, for example, where they're connecting students, universities, and employers to help create unique curriculums that prepare students for open roles in fast-growing industries and employers so that those students know there's an internship, there's roles waiting for them when they go through that, specific curriculum on the other side. And it's really created a lot of demand, these really, critical pipelines for folks that, might not have otherwise been able to see all the way through. And so programs like that have been really popular, really innovative. And frankly, they even have retention built in. So you get MEDC side investment in those students if you choose to stay in Michigan for 12 months after you begin that internship or job.
Yeah, we're speaking with Hilary Doe, Chief Growth and Marketing Officer for the MEDC, helping to try to drive economic growth and population growth here in the state. And Hilary, you mentioned, of course, transit, which is really important for young people, right? I think older generation, of course, you're going to get a car, right? First thing I wanted to do when I turned 15 and 9 months was get my driver's license. Not the same now. You got to be able to get to these jobs. Sometimes people can be priced out for that, especially when starting. Is there any role that you guys have in helping us get transit? Because without the transit, it is going to be harder to attract that younger population that doesn't necessarily believe the same thing in needing a car.
Yeah, I will say that transit came up everywhere we went. It's, of course, really common piece of feedback among young people in Detroit, but frankly, it was a common piece of feedback in the entire state, in rural communities, everywhere we went. Folks talked about transit. And yes, of course, the state has a role to play. We see our regional transit authority making some good moves. We saw the Detroit Airport Express launch, which was a good, sign for us in making some moves in the right direction, but a lot of places to go. We have a lot more to do in that regard. And I think that folks will see a lot of progress over the next little bit here because, frankly, we have this groundswell of support. Folks are being loud about, what they want in this area, and I think that we see it's inextricably linked to our growth goals.
Got about a minute left, but Hilary, while I have you here, I want to get an idea from you now that we have this year under our belt with the growing Michigan Together Council. What are the next steps moving forward? What do you think is the single most important thing that you guys can do in your office to help us achieve this growth?
Yeah, well, the next phase, we're working on these statewide policy goals to implement that blueprint for growth. We're rolling out these pilot programs in communities across the state to experiment with, talent attraction and retention programs that are community driven. And we're doing the marketing work to tell our story in state and across the country that Michigan's a great place to live, work, and play, and want Michiganders' help getting that done.
All right. Well, Hilary Doe, Chief Growth and Marketing Officer for the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. Glad to hear about that. Glad to give you one more round with the What Up Doe joke. And thank you so much for joining us on our special coverage.
Thank you.
This is WDET on 101.9. I am Nick Austin here hanging out with you. And coming up, we're going to transition to what the Michigan legislature can do to help us grow Michigan together with the help of State Senator and President Pro Tem of the State Senate, Jeremy Moss, when we return.
WDET is supported by the College of Business Administration at the University of Detroit Mercy. UDM is offering a new Master of Science degree in ethical leadership focused on sustainable, ethical, and inclusive problem solving. Admission is open to qualified applicants with a bachelor's degree in any field. Course selection is flexible, with no prerequisites, 4 required courses, and 6 electives. Learn more at business.udmercy.edu.
The annual Mackinac Policy Conference brings together influential politicians, captains of industry, and thought leaders. WDET will broadcast special coverage from Mackinac Island this month with interviews and news stories that connect you to the ideas and agendas shaping Metro Detroit. Special coverage begins with All Things Considered on Tuesday, May 28th and runs through Thursday, May 30th. Find out more about WDET's coverage of the Mackinac Policy Conference at wdet.org/MPC.
You're listening to WDET live from Mackinac Island as we continue our special coverage of this year's Mackinac Policy Conference, where the theme is Bridging the Future Together. But what exactly does Bridging the Future Together mean? And why are we feeling like in this era where so many of us feel like we may be more divided than ever, is it really an achievable goal? Some might even say, is it desirable? To help us answer these difficult questions, especially when it comes to our policymakers and lawmakers in Lansing, I'm joined right now by State Senator Jeremy Moss, a Democrat from Southfield. He's also the president pro tem of the Michigan Senate, where he is serving his second term. Senator Moss, welcome to WDET.
Good to see you. Glad we're having these conversations.
I am also, because when I think about these themes and what we do up here at Mackinac, I know not everybody gets a chance to come up here, but you see so many policymakers around, and it really is the biggest opportunity, it seems like, to get so many people in one area. But when you're not on the island, some might think, what is this, just a vacation? What are they doing up there? So can you explain, what value do you find in making sure everybody can get up here? What helps you out when you're up here at a policy conference?
So we're all on this island, and we all actually share the same goal. We are all champions of Michigan and champions of the Detroit region specifically. And this is an opportunity for policymakers like me to be connected with nonprofit leaders, education leaders, corporation leaders, civic activists to talk about these conversations. You know, we talked about how our politics are partisan and divided, but on this island, we're all pro-Michigan. And so that's why it's good to have everybody in the same place at the same time, connecting with one another on how we can share those goals to move our state forward.
Yeah, do you have an example that you can think back? I mean, you're serving your second term right now, of something you were able to accomplish at Mackinac that you don't think you might have been able to accomplish had you not been up here.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about economic development, and it's important that it doesn't have to be the business community against the average citizen. I was just having a conversation with a business leader whose primary goal, I mean, obviously he wants his business to excel. It's a large corporation in our community, but his primary goal is housing. And affordable housing, you know, because he needs the talent and workforce to be attracted here and to find a place to live. So again, you know, you can kind of break down these misconceptions about that business growth. It doesn't include things like placemaking, housing, transit. I heard the previous conversation. These are all fully developed policy goals that the business community, the civic community, residents alike all need to be having all at once.
One policy goal that I know that you're working on is voting rights here in Michigan. And, you know, we've got the Federal Voting Rights Act, and Michigan has done some work to strengthen our electoral or our voting rights. But why do you think, what are you working on specifically there, and why do you think it's so important if we already have these other protections in place?
Sure. I chair the Senate Elections Committee, and obviously we've had a series of heated and contentious elections, and this year is going to be no different. I'm not breaking news on that. But last year we went through really a gargantuan task to implement early options for voting. That includes 9 days of early voting here in the state of Michigan, which people now are able to utilize. Ease of access of absentee ballots, helping clerks also to process those absentee ballots. So we did a lot last year with election administration and making those processes better. Now we're talking about pro-voter initiatives. I think it is apparent that certain federal laws and federal precedents are now under attack and under threat. And so here in the state of Michigan, what we're trying to do is codify and enshrine in state law measures that are in the Federal Voting Rights Act, and by creating a Michigan Voting Rights Act. That includes ensuring there are no local ordinances or local laws that would prohibit people from voting if they are a qualified voter. We want to make reduce those barriers based on mobility access, based on language access. So we have a 4-bill package that we've been hearing through my committee, the Senate Elections Committee, to protect voters. I think that's the next step in our voting rights process.
It's really good to hear you say that. I think one of the things we all acknowledged or realized, especially for folks who were really believe in the protection of women's right to choose, to abortion, and how we had just kind of relied on the federal government and the Supreme Court decision in Roe and X, Y, Z. And then when that went away, what do we have here in Michigan? Being proactive to make sure legislation works for folks. One of the things I know that you're working on right now is also oversight. And I want to kind of get into that because in an interview, Governor Whitmer signaled to the Michigan Advance yesterday that she would support increased transparency in state government, but was uncertain if it would move forward. And I know you're on the forefront of that right now, but that would make some wonder if Democrats control Lansing. You have a co-sponsor, as a Republican, Senator Ed McBroom. What's the tension? What's causing the difficulty in getting this past the finish line?
So what we're talking about is you as a journalist utilize the Freedom of Information Act to get information out of government. You are entitled to that. Every citizen, every resident is entitled to that. But in Michigan, we are almost alone in the nation in that we shield people. We don't provide them a route to access records from the governor's office or the state legislature. You cannot FOIA the state legislature. It doesn't apply. And so what has made it such a long journey, and I started this my first term in the House in 2015, and here we are almost 10 years later, on the final leg of this long journey is that it is institution changing. It is culture changing. We've seen a series of scandals come out of Lansing, and a lot of that activity from bad actors can only happen in the dark. We're trying to shine a light on those places by allowing people to see the inner workings of government and request our records, our emails, our documents, what goes on to have these decisions be made. So we are on the final leg. We've got it out of committee to, at long last, subject the governor's office and the state legislature to Freedom of Information Act requests. I anticipate action in the Senate on this very soon. The Senate has always been the holdup. We were able to get it out of the House, and then the Senate was the backup, and I've been kind of chirping from the Senate over the last several years in our previous majority. But this new majority, has put it as a priority, and I'm confident we will get this thing moving and finally close this loophole.
Something that you can do before election this fall.
I'm hopeful. I really am hopeful about it.
Okay, because this really, I think, does go to this idea, especially when you talk about having a Senator Ed McBroom, again, a Republican, working with you, the idea of bipartisanship, which leads me to this idea of bridging the future together. Some would say that means working bipartisan. How important do you believe it is to get bipartisan buy-in on bills, or is this a go-it-alone strategy? Where do you find that line when it comes to working across the aisle?
And I always try to find the nonpartisan path first. I'm always trying to hear good ideas, and I think we were able to produce that in our voting rights legislation from last year. I worked with Senator Ed McBroom as we pushed forward on the implementation of early voting and other voting options. Ed McBroom and I have worked together on this transparency stuff as well. So obviously the partisan battles make the headlines, and there are some things that are incredibly contentious, and I find some things very problematic about the far right that has a representation in our legislature, but there are definitely opportunities to find nonpartisan and bipartisan solutions to the problems that face us.
Again, we're speaking with State Senator Jeremy Moss here on our continuing coverage of the Mackinac Policy Conference. You know, one of the things that we've been talking about here is bridging the future together. For you, what does that look like in terms of what you guys do in the state Senate? Because when we're talking about passing laws, those are things that have impacts on people. Some are very partisan right here. Again, as we get more divided, you might have folks on the left telling you, why are you working with those folks over there? Can you point to things that have a positive impact right now for residents?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also a former city councilman from Southfield before I came to the legislature. And we have a caucus of former municipal officials, both Republicans from right-leaning communities and Democrats from left-leaning communities. And we are working together. I heard earlier we talked about, placemaking and giving our communities more resources. We're working on shoring up revenue sharing because our communities aren't Republican or Democrat when it comes to trash pickup, when it comes to parks, when it comes to fixing local roads, when it comes to other amenities that our local communities need. They're all Michigan communities, and so we've been able to bridge that divide. And as former local officials, regardless of our party, to come together to try and put into our budget more support for our local communities back home.
That's right. The local communities are important. We're broadcasting. We're based in Detroit. I know that Metro Detroit, very important for you, coming up, doing your thing in Southfield. The region moves together, has to move together. You're up here in Mackinac. What are you doing right now to help the folks back home in terms of making it a stronger, bridging the future together for us all?
Yeah, I'm having these conversations.
Yeah.
I mean, really, the topic each year is about growing our economy, and that has many different forms. It's not just about the bottom line of a given business. It is about making Michigan an attractive place to grow a business, to grow a family, and think about, what are the things that need to take us to the next decade and the next decade. And everybody on this island, again, as I said at the top, is pro-Michigan, and it's nice to have these conversations where, we can set aside some partisan politics and move Michigan forward.
Is there anything specifically that you are looking forward to getting done before you get off this island? I think I have some ideas, but I'm going to let you tell us.
Honestly, I'm excited about the panels. I'm excited to hear about some of the things that other folks are working on. I have my own set of goals, but more than anything, I'm looking to learn to hear what other people are doing.
Yeah, it's that interactivity, the ability to hear from other smart folks here up on the island. You are one of those. State Senator Jeremy Moss, thank you again for joining WDET special coverage from the island.
I appreciate it.
This is WDET, and coming up, we're going to continue our coverage of the 2024 Mackinac Policy Conference, this time with the help of Mishmash's Shayna Roth as she joins to provide more perspective of this year's event.
Our live special coverage. I'm hopefully a familiar voice to a lot of you, though maybe not at this time of day. I'm Shayna Roth, co-host of Mishmash, and I am here right now with an old buddy, an old co-host of Mishmash, Jake Neer, now of Automotive News. Hi, Jake.
Hey, Shayna. I feel like, so we did this for like 5 years or something like that.
So many.
I don't think we ever did this live, so
No,
this will be.
we have not.
This will be new.
This is our first Mishmash going live.
That's right.
Very excited to be doing it with you. So, Jake, you have been to Mackinac several times before. As some listeners might know, this is my first time on the island. You just got in last night. How are things shaping up so far?
Good. Busy as usual. It's always kind of chaotic, but I don't know. The atmosphere is pretty loose this year, and just keeping busy.
And obviously, we are on an island that does not allow cars.
Right.
There's plenty of bikes and horses, but that doesn't mean that there isn't automotive news going on. You just came from an event about the auto industry. What happened?
Yeah. We talk a lot about this conference as a political event, but it's also very much fundamentally a business event, too. In fact, that's kind of the idea, right? It's the intersection of policy and business and getting everybody in leadership roles together to talk about those things. So obviously in Michigan, business means automotive, at least in large part that's true. There was sort of a conference within a conference, as there is every year. Mich Auto holds a summit here with panels, lots of automotive people getting together and talking about the big issues affecting their businesses.
And what was one of the big issues that came up during this?
China. China is the big issue right now. I don't think there's any question about that. The big panel at the end of the Mich Auto event featured Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, Congressman Pete Stauber of Minnesota, Kristen Gicek of the Fed Reserve Chicago, and Michael Dunn, who's sort of a foremost expert on the auto industry in China. And Dunn wrote recently that China's auto manufacturing capacity could grow to 75% of the global supply. So that would be a world in which the vast majority of cars, trucks are all built in China. And it's not a joke. I mean, it's really a possibility that we could see something like that. BYD just announced a new $50,000 pickup truck that they announced in Mexico. And it's kind of hard to imagine where they plan to sell that truck unless it's here in the U.S. And that's a huge threat to Detroit automakers. I mean, when it comes to building pickups and selling them to Americans, that's GM, Ford, Stellantis' bread and butter right there.
Yeah, I mean, what is Detroit if we don't have the auto industry here with us, if it just keeps getting outsourced like that? And after the panel, you spoke about this with Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, who said she wants to keep those Chinese brands out of the U.S. market. How does she think she could do that, or we could do that? Right.
It's a tough question because it's not just, you can't just pass a law that says we're going to ban cars from China.
Right.
It's a lot more difficult than that. trying to keep products out of a country that has a lot of free trade agreements especially is tough. And as I just mentioned, BYD is planning that plant in Mexico, which we have a free trade agreement with. So, what's keeping them from building it there and then selling it right over the border here in the U.S.? President Biden just quadrupled tariffs on Chinese-made EVs. Those are EVs made in China, not in other countries, but those cars don't really exist right now. We don't have EVs, at least other than, I think there's like some buses in California or something like that. But other than that, we don't have Chinese EVs in the market right now, so those tariffs don't really affect any current products. So Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, she says that those tariffs are sort of a start, but she wants it to go a lot further. She didn't give a lot of specifics about policies, but said it's time to take a hard look at our trade laws to prevent those kind of backdoor situations from happening, getting products into the U.S., and that she thinks that there's a lot of bipartisan support for this. So I guess, we'll keep an eye on that.
Well, and I feel like one of the things that the automakers need to keep in mind is that they need to be producing a product that people want to buy. Mm-hmm. Are they doing enough to stay competitive, particularly when it comes to things like electric vehicles that I think there is a growing interest in, but not a whole lot of vehicles being done in that way by the big three?
We're in a weird time right now for EVs because everyone not named Tesla is having a really hard time making money on EVs, like actually making a profit on every EV they sell. I think Hyundai and Kia say that they are now making a profit on electrified models, but I think that might include hybrids. But either way, we're still trying to figure this out. Ford, for example, is losing more than, if you take all the investments they've made, all the build-outs that they're doing, they're losing something like $100,000 or more on every EV they sell. So that's a big problem to solve. Now, once they scale up, once they're building more EVs, it won't be that as big of a loss. And I think the biggest thing right now is Detroit automakers have to figure out how to build an affordable EV that people want to buy. And I think if they make it affordable, a lot of people will want to buy them if it's a good product. But right now, we're not even competitive in our own market as it is. So China's got the entire Chinese government subsidizing them every step of the way. It's not really an even playing field, as Debbie Dingell likes to say a lot. And Mary Barra said the same thing. Not an even playing field. We need to even it out is their message.
Talk to us about suppliers. I feel like we have been hearing a lot about there being an issue with supply right now.
I think the supply issues that we saw around the pandemic times are mostly going away. Inventory is way up. If you drive past your local dealer, chances are there's going to be a ton of cars and trucks on the lot. They're not selling them as fast as they're coming in. So the problems have changed. But during the pandemic, it was a weird time for suppliers because they typically, they shipped out their supplies, their products to the OEMs, and they were good, right? Like they got their orders, they filled them, and they made their money that way. When the supply problems hit during the pandemic, everything flipped, and the automakers, the retailers were making all the money, and suppliers were losing money. A lot of people were worried about suppliers going out of business. So right now, it's sort of gone back to normal for them. But I think the biggest challenge right now is making sure that suppliers are figuring out a way to stick with automakers in their new product plans. So EVs is a good example. Automakers are changing their EV strategies all the time, and that affects suppliers. That means suppliers have to figure out how they're going to make different types of equipment to send to them. So, and how to make money doing it. So it's a lot of challenges. I mean, this EV and all the sort of technology revolutions happening in the auto space. Keeping up with that is much more than a full-time job.
I really want to talk about strikes with you.
Okay.
Because there have been a lot of strike and strike threats recently in a lot of different industries, and it feels like we're starting to finally sort of come out of that, and this has included the auto industry. The United Auto Workers went on strike against the Big Three last November, and the workers did really well. They locked in raises in wages of at least 25%, and for some temps as much as 168%, as well as a boost in retirement contributions and other benefits. I'm curious, now that we're a few months out of this, how has this been playing out? And has it had an impact on car buyers yet? Will it?
It's kind of hard to say. I have a feeling, just speaking off the cuff here, car prices are just high, generally speaking, and automakers are making profits on those cars that aren't EVs, that is. So it's, I don't think that there's a direct line to say, look, the labor costs going up is driving auto prices up. It's just the entire sort of atmosphere of the auto industry is all sort of going in that direction. But I think the biggest thing, though, from all that is the momentum it gave to the UAW to start going and organizing down south. They just won a vote at VW in Chattanooga, Tennessee. It's the first Southern automaker that or plant that they were able to win a UAW vote in, and then they went ahead and actually lost a vote in Vance, Alabama, at their plant at Mercedes. So that sort of makes people wonder, like, oh, is this momentum still building for the UAW? Sean Fain, the president of the UAW, said it was a setback, but at the same time, this is Vance, Alabama.
Right.
This is deep south.
Yep.
This is anti-union territory. So the fact even that they got, I think it was 44% of the vote or something like that, it could signal that, the long game is actually working in their favor. The biggest question is what happens in the presidential election.
Yeah.
If Donald Trump wins, all that could go out the window. The National Labor Relations Board, could turn into a very anti-union place once again.
Jake, we got about 2 minutes left, and as you know, this is live radio, which means we can do whatever we want within the FCC rules. So let's talk about your work at Automotive News. What's the latest projects you've been working on? Where can people find what's going on over there?
Okay, how do I say this within FCC rules? No, it's such a fun time to cover the auto industry. Everything's changing. There's so much new technology. We're at this sort of precipice of a new era in the automotive industry, and here, of course, seeing it up front here in Michigan is exciting, and also sort of, it can be a little nerve-wracking sometimes, like I said, when you're talking about China, when you're talking about, making money on EVs, that sort of thing, but there's never been a better time to cover the auto industry than right now.
And what podcasts have you been working on right now?
Oh, yeah, that too. So Daily Drive is our daily podcast from Automotive News, and it's basically just like all the news you need to know to keep up in the auto industry. We also have Shift, which is all about technology, mobility. And then I also am working on a limited series podcast called Driving to Zero. It's about carbon emissions and making sure they go out.
Those are so many wonderfully punerific titles for podcasts. I hope
Thanks.
people check them out. You're Jake Neer from Automotive News. I'm Shayna Roth from Mishmash. This has been such a pleasure, Jake. I've loved getting to hang out with you on the island, and yeah.
Anytime. Seriously, anytime.
You're listening to 1019 WDET. I'm Nick Austin, and thank you, Shayna Roth, for that last segment. As we broadcast live from Mackinac Island, this is the 2024 Mackinac Policy Conference, where the theme is Bridging the Future Together. And to help us continue our look at what we need to do to bridge the future together, we are joined by a person who is doing a lot of work in terms of helping implement changes to our policy here, specifically public policy that affects folks in economically as well as growing Michigan, and especially a focus on our youth. We're going to get into that a little bit later, but right now I am happy to be joined by Monique Stanton, who is the president and CEO of the Michigan League for Public Policy. Monique, thank you for joining us on WDET on the island.
Great, thanks for having me, Nick.
So I know there's a lot of things going on here in terms of what happens on the island. You just see so many interactions. And then before we get into some of the work that you've been doing in policy and what you think are important things for us to focus on, I would like you to just tell us what you're excited about, why you come up here on the island, and what some of your goals are when you're here.
Right. So policy in Michigan is really how we show what we value as a state. One of the things I say all the time in Michigan is poverty is a policy choice. The systemic issues that we face are all rooted in the types of policies and the types of budget things that we prioritize. And so this is a really good opportunity to talk to lawmakers and administration and the media and community members about things that are really important to Michiganders.
And it is important not only to Michiganders, Detroiters, we're all Michiganders, right? But when we talk about wealth and income inequality, that is a really key issue. A lot of focus up here on growing the economy, which would be good, but you need some intentionality, it would seem, to close this wealth gap because it keeps growing. What are the things that you're looking at in terms of what we can do? What are the best steps that we can do to try to help close that wealth gap?
Right. So a perfect example is during COVID, we expanded the child tax credit at a federal level. We cut childhood poverty in half nationally, and when that lapsed, child poverty skyrocketed. So we have clear data that when we can provide people cash, we really reduce poverty. So last year we raised the earned income tax credit in Michigan from 6 to 30%. That put dollars directly in the hands of people in Michigan. Right now we're really emphasizing expanding the RX Kids program in Flint. That's a cash program for new and expectant moms that get some dollars in the last trimester of their pregnancy, and then $500 a month afterwards in that child's first year of life. And that is transformational in families' lives. It helps go to pay for things like housing and food and child care, and gives people the tools that they need, which is really money to pay for the things that they need to make sure that their family's doing well.
We want to also make sure that we can do this institutionally. You're talking about public policy levers that we can pull, but when we think of like inflationary effects, right? Someone might think, well, hold on, if we're just pushing money over into this pocket, what does that do to create a sustainable place where people can actually, maybe get off the cycle, maybe not need quite as much assistance and get to points where they're growing in that level? How do you connect those dots in terms of making that impact?
Right. So one, when people, especially when you, one of the biggest economic crises in a person's life is when they have a baby. That's when all kinds of things go on. So addressing sort of short-term cash when people are having children really does help for economic security and stability. When we had the expanded child tax credit, we saw credit scores go up, we saw savings go up, we saw debt go down. So really tangible, concrete outcomes of what can happen. Beyond that, we need to do things like making sure that childcare is affordable and accessible so people can go to work, so it's not taking up high proportions of a person's total income. We need to do things like boosting wages. Michigan, 20% of our young people between 18 and I want to say 26 are living in poverty. When we talk about growing Michigan's total population, if we are not supporting the young people that are here, it's really concerning. So we want to make sure that they're getting access to good paying jobs, post-secondary education, things that we know long-term are going to boost incomes.
Well, one of the things that you've been focusing on a lot here, of course, you're talking about investing in our children, which is great. But Monique, I don't have any kids, and I don't have that long left, right? I'm not one of the younger ones. So what are things for people out there who are saying, wait, I'm maybe a little bit past the time of having kids. My kids are out of the house, but I still don't want to be left behind in this growth that's happening. I think it's important for me to also have an impact and gain from this. Are there any things that you would advocate for that can help them out, or what should we be looking at?
So I think one of the things that we should talk about is paid family leave. So that's one of the league's long-time priorities, and oftentimes we think about paid family leave as parental leave when people have a child, but the reality is it's for people when they are sick, their spouse, their partner, their parent, or their child are sick. They should have access to not losing their jobs, access to income to take care of themselves when really difficult times in their life. So if you are taking care of a parent, as we were talking about that older generation that's maybe going into hospice care, end-of-life care, you should not be dealing with that really difficult time and then worried that you're going to lose your house or face a bankruptcy because you can't keep your job. And we want to make sure that is available. We just released polling data that shows there's widespread support in Michigan. Upwards of 2/3 of Michiganders support paid family leave in Michigan, and so we really want to see it cross that finish line.
I'm glad you brought that up, because this is something that we've been tracking here at the station also, is how, as our seniors are growing older and as there are more issues in terms of, you get an older population, there is more need for care. And with inflation, care is becoming more expensive.
Right.
These family members who we rely on not only to work are doing it out of their own pocket. So
right.
paid family leave can help out for that. As we're speaking with Monique Stanton, President and CEO of the Michigan League for Public Policy. And another thing that I would like to tackle when you're talking about growing our economy, we look at things like a good influx of people that we can get in is immigration. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about what you believe, why you guys think immigration is a good way for us to try to help boost our economy here in
right.
Michigan?
So when we look at our overall population in Michigan, when we have seen where we grow our population, it's typically through immigration. Where Michigan doesn't do a great job is people come to our state, they stay for a few years, and then they leave to go to other places. Immigrants have a high proportion of entrepreneurship, starting new businesses. They participate in all kinds of jobs throughout the economy, and so we really want to see make Michigan a more welcoming place. We think from a values perspective, we should be welcoming, treating people with dignity and respect. There's lots of things that we can do to support new immigrants coming to Michigan.
Affordable housing is something that is also really key here. We can talk about all of these impacts in terms of helping people out with their children, but if you can't afford a house, right, especially living, that's going to be a problem. Yep. There are a lot of obstacles in creating more housing. Is there anything that you would advocate for that we should be looking at to help increase that?
Right. So continued investment in the Housing Community Development Fund is really important. And I want to say that housing is an issue that's important in the city of Detroit, but wherever we go in Michigan, whether it's Detroit, whether it's rural Michigan, whether it's the UP, whether it's the west side of the state, affordable housing is consistently brought up as a concern. And so making sure that we have enough for the supply side, doing things like protecting a source of income. So if somebody's paying for housing with a housing voucher, they should not be discriminated against. Having right to counsel, sort of expanding what's happening in Detroit statewide, are all really important things. And then also going back to economic security. Housing and affordable housing is a two-pronged issue. We need to have the supply, and then people need to have good incomes in order to pay for housing.
Yeah, but I think the issue that I think we run into, right, especially a place like Detroit, there is land, and people want to build, but getting everything in place, right? You have oversight issues and greasing the wheels. I've heard there's a tremendous logjam in terms of even trying to construct, getting the skilled labor to do it. So are there specific things that you would advocate for right now that would help grease those wheels so that we could get more housing?
Right. So again, going back to that Affordable Housing Development Fund, expanding investments. The governor just made an announcement today. She wants to increase the long-term goal for affordable housing in Michigan. So I think those are things that are going to help. It's reducing some of the red tape in terms of zoning, looking at density, and then making sure that there is local support for housing policy, because housing solutions in Detroit are going to look different than they are in a community like Traverse City or a community like Petoskey or the UP. So making sure that there's local solutions as well.
I'm glad you brought that up also, because one thing that we've been looking at more, and I know you've been working on, is more community partnerships, trying to have inclusive policy making. However, that can also look difficult, right? I think some advocates for it, even the state, people who support this idea would say it's great, it's real expensive, it's difficult to meet people, it can cause balloons in terms of the payments that we're trying to make to implement this policy. Do you have recommendations for people? What do you say people need to know about creating more inclusive policymaking, building these community partnerships?
Right. So, a plug for MLPP and the Michigan League for Public Policy is, using tools like us in terms of budget analysis, participating and making sure that you have access to information. Information is power, and making sure you understand the process, and it's a complex process, is a first step. It's forming relationships with your lawmakers, so going to coffee hours and reaching out and meeting people, so their lawmakers have a name and a face when they're making these really important decisions on behalf of all Michiganders.
Well, you're up here, you're talking to the lawmakers, you're trying to make it happen. We have a lot of great ideas. We could spend money in a lot of areas, but in terms of making an impact right now for a lawmaker that's listening, what would the recommendation that you have be?
So I'd say expanding RX Kids and things like the child tax credit. That's what we do. It puts money in the hands of people, and that's what you need. You can take as many financial literacy classes as you want, but if you don't have access to cash, it's impossible to budget.
Access to cash is the thing. I know there's going to be some people who say, my tax dollars, why should that go to that? How does that come back and help me? So real briefly, we're about to get out of here in about a minute, but just let us know for the people who have that pushback, tell them why it pays back for them to invest in these things.
Right. So looking at the earned income tax credit, those dollars go right back into our local economy. They are typically not held onto by people, and so they are spent on things at your local mom and pop stores. They're spent at your local car repair shop, the grocery store, your child care provider, your medical provider, and so that has a direct economic impact at a local level, spent locally, and I think that's one of the really important reasons that we want to look at that.
Monique Stanton, President and CEO of the Michigan League for Public Policy, thanks for joining our special coverage of the 2024 Mackinac Policy Conference.
Great, thanks for having me.
That's going to do it for this hour of special coverage here from the Mackinac Policy Conference. You can listen to recent episodes of all of your favorite programming at WDET.org, and you can subscribe to your favorite podcast, even re-listen to this one at that website as well. This show is produced by Sam Corey, David Lyons, and Jack Philbrandt. Our engineer is Nate Bender. Our assistant producers are Anel Scott and Sydney Walkley. And today's production of WDET is a listener-supported service of Wayne State University. If you like what you hear and want to support what we do, consider becoming a member at WDET.org/donate. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk again tomorrow.
WDET is supported by the College of Business Administration at University of Detroit Mercy. UDM is offering a new master's degree in ethical leadership focused on sustainable, ethical, and inclusive problem solving. More information at business.udmercy.edu.